What is up, you guys, and welcome back to How to Love a Battered Woman, the podcast. My name is Nia Renee, and I am your host. And this week, we are talking about all things narcissistic parental abuse, narcissistic parents, toxic parenting, abusive parenting, you name it. That's what we're going to talk about this week because that is like the number one question that I get. How do you navigate your parents who are toxic in your life? How do you navigate those relationships? So we're going to talk about that today. So as many of you guys know, I grew up in an abusive environment. My parents were both, abusive in their own ways. My father, I don't believe my father is a narcissist. I know my father has narcissistic tendencies, and that's something that him and I have been working through. That is something him and I have been working on in our relationship, is addressing the behaviors and the things that happened in the past between him and I. As far as my mother goes, I honestly and truly believe that she has NPD. And I'm not weaponizing that. I get that a lot too of, oh, you're weaponizing a mental illness. I'm not weaponizing anything. If you struggle with something and you're not working on that something that you're struggling with and you're taking that something out on everybody else, then it needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about. So we're going to talk about it. I feel like I particularly struggle with this topic sometimes because I feel like I'm still in such an interesting place of healing when it comes to my mother. I just recently started calling her my mother again. You guys will get to read all about that in my brand new book coming out in April called Letters to You. But I just recently started calling my mom again. And so I think that it's important to have these types of conversations about what happened to us as children, what happened to us, what is happening to us as adults, and how to navigate these relationships, and how to navigate our feelings in these relationships, and how to navigate going no contact if that's what we want, or navigating, minimal contact, setting boundaries, all of that. I think that's so important because you guys deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and it's not easy. And I wish I knew or had access to the resources that we have now. Back when I was a kid and I was growing up, and in my household, I didn't have the ability to get on TikTok and see, my favorite creator talk about this. I didn't have YouTube to watch videos and, watch things about this topic. So I'm excited to provide that resource to other people. So I just recently learned that there are 5 different types of narcissistic parents. And I think that's so intriguing, and it's really, really cool. I wouldn't say not cool, because obviously this is not a fun, cool topic to talk about, but I think it's very interesting. I think it's very interesting that there are so many different types. So the first type is a grandiose narcissistic parent, which means they see their child or their children as an extension of themselves. These type of parents, they are the type of parents that have likely experienced this type of abuse when they were a child. And this type of abuse is really hard to judge because it's like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, right? You have one person who they present themselves to be to the world, and you have the person who they present to you behind closed doors. And sometimes you'll get Dr. Jekyll, sometimes you'll get Mr. Hyde, but you never really know who's coming to the table. You don't really know if you're going to get the nice version of your mom or if you're going to get the evil version of your mom. And at least that's how it was for me. I kind of disagree. I feel like my mom is a combination of all 5 of these. So before I dive into examples and stuff like that, I guess I should just go through each one of these. But yes, you have the charming one, that charming face and the very nice person in public. And my mother was a teacher, so she was like that at school. She was nice to all of her kids. She was nice to all of her students. But then when she came home, she tormented and just, she fucked us up. That's like the easiest way to say that. Number 2, the enmeshed narcissistic parent, which means the vulnerable narcissist, which I find that intriguing because, like, who knew narcissists could become vulnerable, which is, it's kind of, I mean, that's probably not the best thing to say, considering the fact that, like, my big brother, aka mental illness, aka Lee Hammock, is a diagnosed narcissist, and he's vulnerable every single time he talks about talks about his perspective, which catch our podcast because it's coming out soon. Baldy and the Beast. Mentioned that last week. Anyway, it's vulnerable. That's a certain level of vulnerability. But I always find this to be very interesting because they lack confidence and feel empty in their lives. Thus, they resort to narcissistic behaviors as a way to compensate for their feelings of inferiority. This form of narcissistic parent abuse is the hardest to spot because the abuser often appears as vulnerable. They allow you to get close enough to them. They open up about things that are going on in their lives. They make you feel like they're relatable and they make you feel comfortable. And then boom, they just find a way to become aggressive. And it's very passive. It's very passive aggressive. Actually, that's how my ex-boyfriend was. This one's not my mom. This one's definitely my ex-boyfriend. Anyway, number 3, dismissive narcissistic parent. Narcissistic and dismissive parents are deeply fearful of intimacy. They're afraid of being vulnerable. They're afraid of people getting close to them. They don't talk about their childhood much, probably because they don't remember it, or they don't like to feel that pain. They don't like to discuss and relive that pain. So when they say, well, just move on and get past it and let it go and yada, 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 they're not really doing that. They are genuinely suppressing it and holding it in because they're not processing or feeling those emotions the way that they should be. And then they're only surface level and they're very, very distant with the people in their lives. I believe that's part of what my mother is. Number 4, the competitive narcissistic parent. This is the type of narcissistic parent that envies their child because the child represents a part of them that they have lost. If this is not my mother, then I don't know what is. When they look at you and they see all of the success, they see how happy you are without their help. They see you growing in life and maturing in life, and they see you just becoming a completely different person outside of them. It really upsets them. It makes them really, really angry. And their goal is to crush a child's spirit. It says here, to eliminate the source of their envy. That's what my mother did. No matter how bright my light dimmed, no matter how bright my light shined, she wanted to dim it. She wanted to squash it. She didn't want it to exist because she didn't have that. She no longer had that light and she wanted to dim my light. And I think that's really unfortunate because how do you do that to a child? Why would you do that to a child? Why would you take the brightest light that a child has to offer and just squash it? And I don't know. That makes me sad. That makes me sad because that happened to me. It makes me sad just because how do you do that to your child? Number 5 is unintentional narcissistic parental abuse. The parent is extremely childlike. The form of abuse is often unintentionally instigated by a parent with extremely low emotional immaturity, who always wants to be the center of attention, the way that a child would, and is unable to empathize or listen, and it has a low emotional capacity for regulation. low emotional regulation, a low capacity for regulation. Sorry, words are hard for me most days, as you guys know, because of my brain. Um, I find this one to be particularly interesting because they define it here as more of a benign narcissism that is more developmentally appropriate to that of a child. So they see the parent still being very childlike. They haven't um their brain hasn't matured. They haven't matured into adulthood, and these ones are like the least malicious in compared to the other four types of narcissists that I've mentioned before. So I just think that this is very interesting because it's still abuse, but I think that's why. I mean, that's why it's here, but I don't think that it's just the lowest form of abuse, I guess. So I just find that to be very interesting that one is on here. But like I said, my mother is definitely number 4, the competitive narcissist. She envied me. She, no matter what I did, it just made her mad. Like there was nothing that I could do to satisfy her. There was nothing that I could do to make her happy. There's nothing that I could do to, you know, I don't know. There's nothing I could do. Um, it's like she looked at me. I think that's the hardest part is that she looked at me. So like I said, my abuse started at 4 years old, not just from, the abuse that I endured by my half sister, but, actually, I'm sure the abuse probably started before that. Before is the earliest that I could remember my abuse. And, it's like, how do you look at that child and just think to yourself, let me fuck her up in every way possible because I'm not that child. I'm not at that place anymore in my life. And if I can't be happy or shine, then neither can she. That's so messed up. And that's something that, you know, that's something that I process. Looking at baby pictures for me is something that's so hard for me to do. It's hard looking at photos of me with her. It's hard looking at photos of me as a child because I see the picture. I could see almost the transition phase between the happy child that I was to the child that I became in the progression of photos. And that's hard for me because I literally watch my innocence just fade away. And I watch, seeing photos of myself as a baby, seeing photos of myself as a young child, and just not genuinely being able to comprehend why this was happening to me, why this was happening to my other siblings. Why was this something that we had to go through? Like, it just is something that I genuinely never understand. And that's going to segue into how to cope with these things that have happened, how to cope with your childhood being particularly difficult, because you have to find ways to cope with it and be able to move forward, or else you're going to stay stuck and you're going to stay hurt, and you're never going to be able to heal the way that you deserve to heal. So that's what we're going to talk about. And before we move on, the 5 forms of narcissistic parents, I got that from eggshelltherapy.com, so you guys can check them out. I'm never going to not cite my work, so you guys can check that out on eggshelltherapy.com. That's where I found this full article that I found very, very interesting. Actually, it turns out these 3 things to do when you've suffered from narcissistic abuse is also from eggshelltherapy.com. So just check out eggshelltherapy.com. This is where I found this information. So the number one thing to do when you're trying to navigate these spaces with your abusive parents and narcissism or toxic relationships is mourning for what you did not have. What that means is you have to give yourself time to grieve the fact that you did not have a normal childhood, that you didn't have parents that were loving and caring the way that you deserved for them to be. It means that you need to mourn the loss of that. You need to mourn, give yourself the space in the room and the opportunity to mourn what you did not have. And the way that I've done that is I write in journals. You guys know I'm a journal girl. A lot of you guys have my custom journals that I made for you guys. You guys know that I'm a journal type of person. I talked about this in my last episode, but I wrote a letter recently to my mother. And that one's not necessarily mourning the loss that I didn't have, but I feel like it was like the final bow on that I just tied and was ready to move forward from. But I think I took a significant amount of time, and I've worked on this in therapy. Shout out to Mary. I've worked out on this in therapy in processing how I really felt, not having a mom care about me, not having a mom to be there to teach me how to be a woman, how to take care of my hair, the importance of hygiene, having a period, just being a woman. I just never had someone to take care of me in that manner. And that was hard to cope with. That's hard to digest. And I had to mourn the loss of that. So here it says, mourning here means that we mourn for the childhood we wished for but did not get, and for the parents we deserved but did not get. That is so powerful, because you have to put yourself in a space to grieve that. That's a loss. You're grieving for something that you didn't have. It's not a loss. I mean, you're grieving for it like it was a loss, but you never actually had that. So you have to mourn that. You have to feel that pain. You have to process it. You've got to cry about it if you're a crier. You've got to write about it if you're a writer. Sing about it if you're a singer. Do what you feel like you need to do to process those emotions so that it's no longer being held in your body. And we hold, especially as women, I just recently found out as women, we hold things in our uteruses. Like we hold things in our lower abdominal areas where we hold a lot of our pain and a lot of our emotions. And if we don't process those, and if we don't learn how to navigate that, it's going to stay in us, and it causes us actual physical pain. So it's important to process that. Number 2 is my favorite, because I am that bitch when it comes to setting boundaries. I feel like I'm the queen of setting boundaries. I feel like I'm that person that is way, like I might be a little too good at setting boundaries, but it's so important to set boundaries. So number 2 is setting boundaries with narcissistic parents. It says it can be difficult to set boundaries with narcissistic parents, but rather than expecting them to change their behavior, it is much more empowering to take proactive measures to protect yourself. I tried to have a relationship with my mother until I was 19. So it took 19 years for me to get to a place where I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to deal with this bullshit anymore. I just don't want to do it. So I went no contact with her. And I'm not saying that you guys have to go no contact with your parents. I'm not saying that you have to cut off all communication with them, but it is important to set boundaries with them. They don't get to call you at all hours of the day. They don't get to tell you how you can and cannot live. They don't get to dictate what you do with you and your kids. They don't get to have this control over you anymore. And it's difficult for those who are still financially dependent on their parents, because financial abuse is a really big thing. And it's not talked about enough. I had my financial situation used against me many times. So financial abuse is not talked about enough, especially when you're a child, when you're under the age of 18. You can't just go live on your own. You have to do things the way that your parents said to do them, or else they'll take something away from you. That's abuse. They're using your financial. You can't do that, or else you can't live here. If you're going to do this, you need to get out of my house. If you're going to do that, you can't do this. You need to pay all of these bills for me, or you can't live here. All of those things are financial abuse. I'll probably do a separate episode on financial abuse as I dig deeper and try to figure out how to navigate that, because that was something I never really learned how to get away from. I just got a job and was able to um, get myself into a great position financially to where I didn't have to rely on my parents and I could move out of the house and take care of myself. But that wasn't until, um, I don't know, it was like maybe 5 years ago. I moved back in with my parents, and after I left my narcissistically abusive ex. And again, financial abuse happened in that situation too. So, but setting bound, we'll get back on topic. Sorry, guys, I'm a little all over the place today. I'm so tired. I haven't been sleeping very well. Thanks, menopause. But we'll get back on topic. It's very important to set boundaries with your parents. Whatever boundaries that are safe enough for you to set with your parents, it's important to set those boundaries. That's all I can really say. It's important to set those boundaries, and boundaries could be very simple as, don't talk to me like that. Please don't speak to me in that manner. If you can't talk to me like you and I are both adults, then we can't have a conversation. And they struggle with that one. That is one that they absolutely struggle with. If you cannot talk to me as an adult, if you can't talk to me without screaming at me, if you can't talk to me without belittling me, if you can't talk to me without there being any unnecessary comments, any rude comments, then we don't need to talk. Or we're only going to talk for 30 minutes every couple weeks. I only have space. I only have emotional space for an hour to have a conversation with you a month. That's it. That's all I have space for. And if they don't respect your boundaries, they don't respect you. And if it doesn't serve you, doesn't deserve you, you got to let them the fuck go. And I mean that, and as nice as I possibly can mean that. My mother would berate me. She would send me threatening emails all of the time. She would send me, she would cuss me out all the time. She'd call me screaming, cussing me out on the phone. My father and we had gotten into arguments on the phone. He would scream at me, like literally at the top of his voice, scream at me, telling me to stop talking if I'm trying to ask clarifying questions. And I told him, I was like, if we can't talk like adults, we don't need to talk. He said, fine. And then he hung up on me and I didn't talk to him for a month. Then he apologized for his behavior, understood where I was coming from because other things had transpired during that conversation. It wasn't just the way that he was talking to me, but like he had crossed a boundary that I had set, and I told him he lost access to me. But anyway, he apologized, genuinely meant it, and our relationship has been amazing since. But, those are boundaries that, set firm boundaries. And if you set a firm boundary, they cross it and you don't acknowledge that they've crossed your boundary, they're going to see that as, oh, okay, cool. I could tiptoe on this line as much as I want to. And that's exactly what they're going to do. So unfortunately, you have to set boundaries, and you have to set firm boundaries and stick with your boundaries, or they're just going to keep hopscotching back and forth across that line that you've set, and they're not going to care. And we don't want that. Well, they're probably not going to care anyway, but we want them. Well, I mean, let me not say that, because I feel like I say a lot of things that's very pessimistic, and I'm trying to be more of an optimistic person for you guys. It depends on the relationship that you have with your parents. It depends on the person that you're trying to, have that relationship with. For me and my father, that worked for him. It worked for me to set those firm boundaries and show him what would happen if he crossed those boundaries. For my mother, it didn't work, and I had to go no contact. So I want you guys to understand when I say certain things that there is hope for things to happen in the way that we want them to, or close to the way that we want them to happen. But we also have to have the very real reality in the back of our minds that there's a possibility that it's not going to happen. And that's why we have to mourn that and let that go. But if you have somebody who's willing to allow you to teach them what it is that you want and how you want to be loved and treated and respected, and they'll do that, then that's fine. But you have to look at who you're around, who you're talking to. You have to realize who that person is in order to lay that foundation. And that's just me being real. Number 3, stopping transgenerational trauma. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you might have learned to accept their behavior as normal. Whether you were ignored, belittled, yelled at, or even physically assaulted, you may even believe that there is something wrong with you and that you deserve the abuse. You do not deserve any of that shit. You don't deserve to be screamed at, belittled, talked down on, hit, abused in any form or fashion of what that word means. You do not deserve that. And you got to accept that. You have to accept that you were abused. You have to accept it. You have to acknowledge it. You have to recognize it. And once you do that, that also helps you mourn that process and grieve that pain that comes with acknowledging and accepting that you were abused by the people that were supposed to love you and care about you. You will be able to grieve that pain. You will be able to work through that pain, and then you will be able to never inflict that kind of pain on your future children ever. I can't speak on being a parent, how it is to be a parent, because I'm not a parent and I no longer have the ability to physically have children. So if you're a parent and you have children, all I can say is look deeper within yourself and your behaviors. If you realize, if you try to recognize if the behavior that you're giving to your children feels familiar to you in an uncomfortable and painful way. If you feel like you're talking to your children the way that your parent talked to you, recognize that behavior, change that behavior. We carry a lot of behaviors with us that we were taught. And I will tell you guys a quick story because I've never told this story before, but I recognized it with my niece. So I have a niece. My stepmother has 4 sons. And so my eldest stepbrother has a daughter. And I recognize something within myself that I didn't particularly like. And she came to me one day and she just was she tried to ask me a question. I don't remember what this question was. It was such a long time ago. I'll say like 3 years ago, she came to me and asked me a question. And I couldn't understand what she was asking me. And I literally said to her, I need you to use words. I can't understand what you're like. I can't comprehend what you're saying. I need you to speak. I need you to use words. Mind you, at the time she was like 4. And I was like, I was on FaceTime with one of my friends who has kids. And she was like, wow, when you have kids, she's like, oh, wow. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was just like, that's a kid. And I had to reflect. And I looked at my niece's face and I was like, baby girl, I am so sorry. I'm having a hard time understanding what it is that you're asking me for. Can you repeat your question? And so she repeated her question and I was like, oh, okay. Are you looking for XYZ, whatever it was? And she was like, yes, I am. And I was like, okay, baby girl, I'm so sorry that I spoke to you in that manner and I wasn't giving you my undivided attention. So I wasn't understanding what you were saying. And I apologize for speaking to you like that. And she was like, thank you, Aunt Nia. And then she gave me a really big hug, but it broke my heart. And I realized that like my patience can be very thin, but those are the behaviors that I learned from my mother. That's what my mother would do to me. And I did that to my niece. And that's an unfair thing to do to a child. It's a child. Of course, a child's not going to know how to articulate. They're not going to know how to, they don't know every word. They don't know as many words as a regular adult does. So that was very unfair for her, but it was a huge learning lesson for me to realize that I was not projecting is not the right word, but that I was, behaving in a way that I was taught and that was unacceptable. And so I was like, wow, that was a huge learning lesson for me. And I wish my mother had the emotional intelligence or the intelligence in general to understand that that's what she was doing to me. And so I put myself in my niece's shoes and I was like, wow, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to talk to a child like that ever again. And so I didn't talk to a child like that ever again. So, we learn behaviors, we're taught behaviors, we emulate behaviors that we see, especially as children. We're sponges. Of course we're going to do that. So it's important to make sure that we're paying attention to the behaviors that we are showing. If they are similar behaviors to how we were taught as kids, then we got to pay attention to that. We've got to change that. That way we don't want to pass that on to our kids. You don't want to pass it on to your kids, not because I can't have kids anymore. You don't want to pass it on to your children. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the behaviors that we are presenting and identify those behaviors and then change them so that we don't have generational trauma passed down to our kids. And I'll just say our because it's just an inclusive way to speak. So I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I apologize. I am still in the beginning stages of getting my podcast up and going. So one, it's not what I really want it to look like right now. And number two, I am working on becoming more structured so that I don't just ramble on and on and on. So I apologize for that. My ADHD and my brain condition aren't really good at mixing most times. So I can't just sit up here and just start rambling off on camera. If you guys are watching the visual podcast, if not, still rambling into your ears. So I will be working on that. I promise I will be getting better at this. But I'm excited to continue giving you guys more podcasts because I am one more episode away from tying with how many podcasts I gave you guys last year. But, given the fact that I was sick last year, so I'm trying to give myself some grace and just get back on to providing you guys with a ton of content. So thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of How to Love a Battered Woman, the podcast. My name's Nia Renee, and you guys know what I always do when I gotta sign off. Drink some water, get some rest, and don't let nobody's dusty-ass child treat you any kind of way. I love you, battered hearts. Have a good night or day. Or whatever time you're listening to this at. Just have a good one. Bye.